Miles Davis fired his entire band on stage mid-concert, then finished the show solo. It was the most devastating display of bandleader authority in jazz history. In front of 2,000 people at the Blue Note, Miles looked at his rhythm section and said, "You're done. Pack up and leave." What had started as a routine performance became a masterclass in artistic integrity and the lengths a true artist will go to preserve the music. The audience watched in stunned silence as 4 musicians packed their instruments and walked off stage, leaving Miles alone with his trumpet and a crowd that had no idea they were about to witness something legendary. It was a humid August evening in 1975, and the Blue Note in New York City was packed beyond capacity. Miles Davis was performing with a new rhythm section, young, hungry musicians who had been thrilled to get the call to play with the legendary trumpeter. The lineup included Marcus Williams on bass, a 24-year-old from Detroit who had been making a name for himself in the local jazz scene, Tommy Chen on piano, a classically trained player from San Francisco who had recently moved to New York to break into jazz, Rick Martinez on drums, a session musician who had played with several established artists but never at this level, and David Thompson on guitar, a fusion player who had been recommended by Miles's management company. On paper, it looked like a solid band. Each musician was technically proficient, professionally experienced, and eager to prove themselves playing with one of the greatest artists in jazz history. But Miles had learned over his 30-year career that technical ability and professional enthusiasm didn't always translate into musical chemistry. The evening had started promisingly enough. The first song, a version of All Blues, went reasonably well. The tempo was steady, the chord changes were clean, and Miles' solo had drawn enthusiastic applause from the capacity crowd. But Miles had noticed small problems that the audience couldn't hear. The bassist was playing slightly behind the beat. The pianist was using chord voicings that clashed with Miles's harmonic approach, and the drummer was playing with too much intensity for the subtle dynamics Miles was trying to create. By the second song, Milestones, the problems were becoming more noticeable. Marcus Williams was struggling to find the right feel for the walking bass line, alternating between rushing and dragging in a way that was making the entire rhythm section unstable. Tommy Chen was overplaying, filling every space with complex chord progressions that were impressive but inappropriate for the sparse, cool aesthetic that Miles was pursuing. Miles tried to communicate with the band through musical cues, playing with more space to encourage them to lay back, using hand signals to indicate tempo changes, adjusting his volume to suggest that they should play more quietly. But the musicians seemed unable or unwilling to follow his lead. The third song was So What, one of Miles's most famous compositions, and a piece that required absolute precision in the rhythm section. The iconic bass line had to be played with perfect timing, and the piano and drums needed to support the harmonic structure without overwhelming it. From the first measure, it was clear that the band was falling apart. Marcus Williams came in late on the bass line, then overcompensated by rushing to catch up. Tommy Chen played the wrong chord voicing, creating a harmonic clash that made several people in the audience wince. Rick Martinez was playing the drums as if he were in a rock band, with heavy accents and fills that completely destroyed the subtle swing that So What required. Miles stopped playing mid-phrase and turned around to face his rhythm section. The audience, thinking this was part of the performance, remained quiet and attentive. "What are you doing?" Miles asked, his voice barely audible over the instruments. The musicians looked confused and continued playing. Miles walked over to Marcus Williams and said, "Stop." The bass line faltered and died. The piano and drums continued for a few more measures before they realized something was wrong and gradually stopped playing. The Blue Note went completely silent. 2,000 people sat in their seats, unsure whether this was part of the show or whether something had gone seriously wrong. Miles walked to the center of the stage, still holding his trumpet, and spoke directly into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize, but I can't continue with this rhythm section. They're not prepared to play this music at the level it requires." The audience stirred uncomfortably. Several people looked around, trying to figure out what was happening. Miles turned back to his band. "Marcus, Tommy, Rick, David, you're done. Pack up your instruments and leave." The silence in the venue was deafening. The four musicians stood frozen, unsure whether Miles was serious. "I'm not joking," Miles said, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "This is my music, my reputation, and my responsibility to this audience. I won't let you destroy it with unprofessional playing." Marcus Williams was the first to move, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Miles, we can fix this. Give us another chance." "You've had 3 songs to fix it," Miles replied. "You're not listening to me, you're not listening to each other, and you're not serving the music. I can't work like this." Tommy Chen stood up from the piano bench. "This is humiliating. You can't fire us in front of all these people." "I just did," Miles said. "Either you leave voluntarily, or security will escort you out. But either way, you're not playing another note on my stage." The 4 musicians looked at each other, then at the audience, then back at Miles. The weight of the situation was sinking in. They were being fired publicly, in front of 2,000 witnesses, by one of the most respected artists in jazz. Rick Martinez started packing his drum kit, shaking his head in disbelief. "This is insane, Miles. We're good players. This is just stage nerves." "Good players play well when it matters most," Miles replied. "Stage nerves are an excuse, not a reason." David Thompson unplugged his guitar and started coiling the cables. "You're making a mistake, Miles. The audience paid to see a band, not a solo trumpet show." "The audience paid to hear music," Miles corrected. "Real music. Not the amateur hour you were giving them." As the 4 musicians packed their instruments, the audience watched in fascination and discomfort. Some people were whispering to their companions, trying to understand what was happening. Others sat in stunned silence, recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented in the history of live performance. The venue manager appeared at the side of the stage, looking panicked. He gestured for Miles to come over for a private conversation. "Miles, you can't do this," the manager said urgently. "The audience will demand refunds. The promoter will be furious. This is a disaster." "This is quality control," Miles replied. "Would you rather I finish the show with a band that can't play, or give the audience something they'll remember for the rest of their lives?" "But what are you going to do? You can't play a whole concert by yourself." Miles looked at him with the confidence that had carried him through 3 decades of jazz innovation. "Watch me." As the last musician left the stage, Miles returned to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry you had to witness that, but I hope you understand that music is sacred to me. I won't compromise it for anyone or anything." He paused, looking out at the crowd. "Now, if you'll stay with me, I'd like to play some music for you. Real music." Miles raised his trumpet to his lips and began playing Round Midnight, one of his most beloved compositions. But this wasn't the familiar version that people knew from his recordings. This was something completely different. Slower, more contemplative, filled with space and silence that allowed every note to resonate with maximum emotional impact. Playing solo allowed Miles to control every aspect of the musical experience. He could stretch time, create dynamics that were impossible with a rhythm section, and explore harmonic and melodic ideas that required complete freedom. The trumpet sang in a way that captivated the audience, drawing them into an intimate musical conversation that felt both personal and universal. For 45 minutes, Miles played a set that included reimagined versions of his greatest compositions, spontaneous improvisations, and musical explorations that pushed the boundaries of what a solo trumpet could accomplish. He used mutes to create different tonal colors, employed extended techniques to generate unusual sounds, and demonstrated a mastery of phrasing and dynamics that reminded everyone why he was considered one of the greatest musicians who had ever lived. The audience, initially uncomfortable with the dramatic beginning of the evening, gradually realized they were experiencing something extraordinary. This wasn't just a concert, it was a masterclass in musical communication, artistic integrity, and the power of individual creative expression. When Miles finished his final song, a haunting interpretation of Blue and Green, the Blue Note erupted in the longest-standing ovation anyone could remember. People were crying, shouting, applauding with an intensity that recognized they had witnessed something that would never happen again. Miles acknowledged the applause briefly, then walked off stage without saying another word. The aftermath of that evening became legendary in jazz circles. The four fired musicians each handled the public humiliation differently. Marcus Williams eventually found success as a bassist with other artists, but he never spoke publicly about the Miles Davis incident. Tommy Chen left jazz and returned to classical music. Rick Martinez continued as a session drummer, but always avoided working with artists who had reputations for being demanding. David Thompson gave up music entirely and became a music teacher. Miles, characteristically, never apologized for his decision. In interviews, he would simply say, "I hired them to play music, not to waste people's time and money. When they couldn't do the job, I did what any professional would do." The venue manager, initially furious about the potential financial disaster, discovered that not a single audience member requested a refund. Instead, people were calling the Blue Note asking when Miles would perform again, specifically requesting that he play solo. The recording of that evening, made by someone in the audience, on a portable cassette recorder, became one of the most sought-after bootlegs in jazz history. The sound quality was poor, but the musical content was extraordinary. 45 minutes of Miles Davis at his most creative and uncompromising. Jazz critics wrote about that evening for decades afterward. Some praised Miles for his uncompromising artistic standards. Others criticized him for the public humiliation of his band members. But everyone agreed that the solo performance that followed was one of the most remarkable displays of musical artistry ever captured. More importantly, the evening became a defining example of artistic integrity in an era when many musicians were compromising their creative vision for commercial success. Miles had demonstrated that he would sacrifice money, convenience, and professional relationships rather than allow his music to be diminished by inadequate performance. Young musicians studying that period of Miles's career learned a crucial lesson. Excellence requires not just technical skill, but the courage to demand the highest standards from yourself and everyone around you, regardless of the personal or professional cost. The story also became a cautionary tale for sidemen about the importance of preparation, professionalism, and musical sensitivity when working with established artists. Miles Davis wasn't just hiring players. He was selecting collaborators who could contribute to his artistic vision at the highest level. Years later, when music students asked Miles about that evening, he would say, "I didn't fire them to be cruel. I fired them because the music deserves better." If you're going to put your name on something, you better make sure it's worth putting your name on. The Blue Note performance became a symbol of the uncompromising artistic vision that had driven Miles's entire career. From his early days with Charlie Parker through his electric period, he had always been willing to risk everything: relationships, money, reputation, to serve the music. That evening proved that even at 69 years old, Miles Davis was still capable of surprising everyone, including himself. The solo concert format became something he would occasionally return to for the rest of his career, always generating the same level of intense audience engagement and critical acclaim. If this story of uncompromising artistic standards and the courage to make difficult decisions moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand that true excellence sometimes requires making choices that others won't understand. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to preserve the integrity of your work? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to check out more stories about the moments when artists chose their principles over convenience.